Have you ever seen a commander of millions cowering in a sewer, begging for his life? Have you ever seen a man who called himself a god die in a puddle of his own urine? No one dared to save him. These names once made the whole world tremble. But in the face of death, they ended up in the most absurd and pathetic ways. Today, we are tearing off the curtain of history to show you the final moments of these 10 notorious figures. I suggest you like and save this video right now, because what you are about to hear might make you question the very nature of power. Let's go into God mode and return to the scene of the final bloody ending. The first man we have to talk about is the synonym for 20th century nightmares: Adolf Hitler. By late April 1945 in Berlin, the air no longer smelled of fanatical zeal. It was replaced by scorched earth and the rumble of Soviet tanks. The man who once commanded millions with his spit-firing speeches was now trapped like an underground rat. He was hiding in a concrete bunker 8 meters beneath the Reich Chancellery. Outside was a storm of fire. Inside was the silence of the grave. Hitler's face was pale and his hands were shaking. His inner circle was thinning out by the hour. In the face of Soviet bayonets, absolute loyalty turned out to be worthless. On the midnight of the 29th of April, a bizarre wedding took place in the bunker. Hitler married his longtime companion Eva Braun. There were no flowers and no blessings, only the shaky handwriting of the notary and the cold resolve of suicide. The next afternoon at 3:30 p.m., Hitler finished his final vegetarian meal. He shook hands with everyone left and retreated to his private room. A single muffled gunshot broke the tension. When the guards entered, they smelled bitter almonds. That was the scent of cyanide mixed with gunpowder. Hitler had bitten a capsule and shot himself in the head. He spent his life trying to conquer the world. Yet in the end, he was too afraid to even leave his body to his enemies. They carried him to the garden and doused him in gasoline. They set him ablaze under the thunder of Soviet artillery. A war criminal who escaped human judgment, but was forever etched onto the pillar of history's shame. Would you call this undignified or just cowardly? Let's head south from Berlin to Hitler's so-called mentor, Benito Mussolini. If Hitler's end was cold and dark, Mussolini's was a pure ugly carnival. This was the man who once strutted on balconies preaching about the new Roman Empire. On the 27th of April 1945, he was found wearing an oversized German military coat. He was shivering in the corner of a truck trying to flee to Switzerland. He tried to hide his famous face with a helmet, but he underestimated the eyes of the partisans. Near Lake Como, they dragged him out like a common criminal, along with his mistress Clara Petacci. The next day, the execution order arrived. Mussolini was frantic and reportedly tried to trade money for his life. But bullets don't take bribes. After the rat-tat-tat of the submachine gun, the founder of fascism slumped into the mud. The partisans threw the bodies into a van and drove them to Milan, to a place called Piazzale Loreto. This wasn't a random spot. Months earlier, Mussolini had publicly executed 15 patriots there. Now karma arrived right on time. The moment the bodies hit the ground, the crowd lost it. People spat on the corpses and trampled them. One woman reportedly fired 5 bullets into Mussolini's body, screaming that each shot was for one of her sons killed in the war. Finally, the bodies were hooked by their ankles and hung upside down from the roof of a gas station. The crowd cheered and jeered below the corpses. The mighty leader was displayed like a pig in a slaughterhouse. The fall from grace was the ultimate irony for a dictator. Now let's turn our gaze to East Asia to talk about the ruler of the most reclusive nation, Kim Jong-il. He ruled North Korea with an iron grip for 17 years. He built a cult of personality where he was portrayed as a god. The official propaganda said he could control the weather and that he didn't even need to use the bathroom. But even gods die, and he died in a very human way. On the 17th of December 2011, on a train traveling through North Korea, Kim Jong-il suffered a massive heart attack, brought on by chronic diabetes and exhaustion from work. The news was suppressed for 2 full days until the 19th of December. The famous anchor Ri Chun-hee appeared in a black dress, announcing the passing of the dear leader in a voice bordering on a wail. The scenes that followed were surreal. Thousands of citizens collapsing in the streets of Pyongyang, wailing in theatrical grief and bowing before his portraits. Whether that grief was genuine or a performance born of fear is anyone's guess. In that extremely oppressive environment, this massive collective emotional release was otherworldly. His body was embalmed and placed in a glass coffin at the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun. He died at the height of his power and passed the dynasty to his son. In the modern world, this succession seems out of place, but for him it was his final victory. He died without ever facing justice for his choices. Next up is the Iron Lion of Georgia, Joseph Stalin. He ruled the Soviet Union through terror for nearly 30 years, but in the end that same terror was what killed him. On the night of the 1st of March 1953, Stalin hosted a heavy drinking session at his dacha near Moscow. He was drinking with his inner circle of officials, men who lived every day in fear of being purged or arrested. At 4 a.m. Stalin dismissed them and locked himself in his room. He had a strict rule that no one could enter without being summoned. By the next afternoon, there was no sound from the room. The guards were panicking, but they were paralyzed by fear. Stalin's authority was like a mountain on their heads. Anyone who broke the rules might lose their head the next second. So the guards just stood outside the door. They watched the sun go down from day until night. It wasn't tea until 10 p.m. that a guard finally mustered the courage to peek inside. He found the giant of the Soviet Empire lying on the floor in a puddle of his own urine. He had suffered a stroke and had been paralyzed for 12 hours. Even more chilling is that when the top officials arrived, they didn't call a doctor immediately. Some just watched him with cold eyes. Stalin struggled for 4 days in bed. His face was contorted and his breathing sounded like a bellows. Finally, on the evening of the 5th of March, the man who decided the fate of tens of millions died in total isolation and helplessness. Some say he was poisoned, others say his officials intentionally let him die. Regardless, his end proved one thing. When you make everyone fear you, that fear becomes the noose that cuts off your help when you need it most. He built a superpower but died alone in filth, leaving the USSR for the Caribbean. Let's talk about the tyrant of the Dominican Republic, Rafael Trujillo. He treated an entire country like his personal backyard and ruled for 31 years with casual cruelty. But on the night of May 30th, 1961, the hunter finally became the prey. Trujillo was in his Chevy, driving on a highway outside Santo Domingo on his way to meet his mistress. He didn't realize that several cars were closing in behind him. These conspirators were officers he had once promoted, and they had the secret backing of the CIA. Suddenly, the cars blocked the road and gunfire erupted instantly. Trujillo was 69 years old, but he still had that hard man streak. He actually pulled out his own pistol to return fire. But a handgun is nothing against Thompson's submachine guns. Within minutes, the man known as the Chief was riddled with bullets. The assassins, however, had no plan for what to do next. They stuffed his body into a car trunk and drove around the city for hours with the corpse. They were arguing and panicking in the car. The body was eventually found by loyalist forces, leading to a bloody purge and chaos in the country. Trujillo died with his hand still gripping his pistol, refusing to let go of his power until the very last second. Next, we have to talk about a very controversial figure, Nicolae Ceausescu. He ruled Romania with an iron fist for over 20 years. He built the most massive palaces while his people froze in bread lines. He thought he was the father of Romania, but to the people he was a vampire. In the winter of 1989, the spark of revolution ignited. On the 22nd of December, as thousands of protesters stormed the headquarters, the CTSKs fled in a helicopter from the roof. Even in that moment, he was asking his aides why they didn't love him anymore. That level of narcissistic delusion is staggering. They were captured by a local militia after the helicopter ran out of fuel. 3 days later on Christmas Day, in a cramped military classroom, a trial began. It was less of a trial and more of a release of fury. It lasted only an hour. The charges were genocide and embezzlement of hundreds of millions. The couple remained defiant as Elena screamed that they had no right to judge her. 5 minutes after the death sentence was read, they were pushed against a courtyard wall. Ceausescu tried to sing the Internationale while Elena shrieked insults. The soldiers didn't even wait for the command and opened fire. Over 100 bullets cut them down in the snow. The whole thing was filmed and shown to the world that night. A leader of 20 years went from power to a corpse in 3 days. It proves that if power isn't built on the will of the people, it is thinner than paper and will blow away in the wind. Now for a more gruesome one, the butcher of Cambodia, Pol Pot. He orchestrated one of the most horrific genocides in history. Cambodia lost nearly a quarter of its population under his rule. It was a pure human tragedy, but he didn't die by a firing squad. After his regime fell in 1979, he spent 20 years as a fugitive in the dense jungles. He lived in damp and simple bamboo huts, constantly paranoid about betrayal from his own men. By 1998, he was old and feeble under house arrest. On the night of the 15th of April, just days before he was to be handed over to an international tribunal, Pol Pot died in his sleep. The official cause was heart failure, but many suspect he was poisoned to avoid a trial. To prove he was really dead, his subordinates invited journalists to see the body. There lay the man who killed millions, dried up on a rotting bed next to some leftover porridge. His body was cremated on a pile of old tires and trash. No funeral and no mourning, just a collective sigh of relief from the world. He died far too easily for the millions of souls he answered for. Let's look at the Lion of Babylon, Saddam Hussein. He ruled Iraq for over 20 years through 3 major wars. He covered Baghdad in statues of himself, but after US forces entered in 2003, he vanished. Months later, he was found in a spider hole near Tikrit, a disheveled old man with a long beard and a dazed look. He faced a 2-year trial where he still tried to act like a king. At dawn on the 30th of December 2006, Saddam stood on the gallows with a coarse noose around his neck. The guards were taunting and insulting him, but Saddam remained eerily calm, reciting prayers until the trapdoor opened. The execution was captured on a grainy cell phone video and leaked online, shaking the world with its raw intensity. Some saw it as justice, while others saw it as a loss of dignity. But Saddam's death marked the end of an era. The man who once strode through palaces ended as a viral video. Speaking of holes and sewers, we cannot forget Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. He ruled for 42 years with a mix of eccentricity and brutality. In 2011, during the civil war, he fled Tripoli and made it to his hometown of Sirte. His convoy was hit by NATO airstrikes. Panic-stricken, the man who called himself the King of Kings hid in a drainage pipe. A place filled with filth and stench. He was dragged out by rebel fighters. Cell phone videos captured the chaos. A bloodied Gaddafi asking the young fighters what he did wrong. The only answer was angry fists and gunfire. He died shortly after from a gunshot to the head. His body was displayed in a commercial meat freezer, where people lined up for miles just to take photos. The man who tore up the UN Charter ended as a trophy in a freezer. His end was a bloody cycle of the violence he used to rule. Finally, a man who died a bit more peacefully, Chile's Augusto Pinochet. He seized power in a bloody 1973 coup. Thousands were tortured or disappeared under his 17-year rule. But unlike the others, he stepped down in 1990. He used every legal loophole to keep himself immune. He played a game of cat and mouse with international warrants, claiming he was too old or senile to stand trial. On December 10, 2006, on International Human Rights Day, Pinochet died in a luxury hospital bed at age 91. The streets were split between people cheering and those in mourning. Pinochet never spent a single day in prison. He managed to outrun human justice through legal and medical stalling. It is an imperfect ending that shows history doesn't always provide a bullet. After hearing the ends of these 10 men, do you notice a pattern? The ones who shouted about 1,000-year empires usually died in cold holes. The ones who called themselves saviors were eventually spit on by their own people. Power is a poison that makes men lose touch with reality. They think they are invincible, but they are just castles made of sand. Which of these endings did you find the most satisfying? Leave your thoughts in the comments and let's have a debate. For the next video, I am planning to dig into a figure whose death is a mystery. If you want to see that, type 666 in the comments. Don't forget to like and follow. I will see you in the next one.